Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to the Temple Institute Parsha class. My name is Gedalia Meyer, and I'm podcasting from Ma'ale Adumim in Israel. We are all familiar with clouds. We see them almost daily in the sky, either one or two here or there, or a mass that covers everything. A cloudy sky is generally considered a bit dreary, since we prefer to see some sun. But a few dotting the heavens tends to be regarded as very pleasant. Clouds don't come close to rainbows as far as sheer beauty and magnificence, but they work wonders to make a regular day feel regular. Clouds are best observed from far away, like on the ground. They are up there, safely out of range, but clearly visible enough to be noticed. When we are in the midst of them, such as in a plane or inside a heavy fog, they lose much of their attraction. This is just too close to home, and we sense that something isn't right. While walking in the middle of a thick fog can be a wonderful experience, it is not something most people want to do on a daily routine. There is a feeling of claustrophobia or a general unease at not being able to see what is right in front of you. We prefer our clouds up in the sky, a comfortable distance away, but still feeling like we could reach out and touch them if we wished. Another use of the term cloud has arisen in recent decades. The cloud associated with storage of digital information. This term has been in use for about 30 years, and in the last few it has come to be seen as the short-term goal of the entire technology. It means putting all the digital information in some sort of shared virtual environment that makes things accessible to anyone, but still private enough for personal use. It is not easy to clarify what the cloud actually is, but we have a good idea of what we mean when we talk about it. Perhaps the word universe or space would have been more appropriate, but this was the way things worked out. It does resemble a cloud in that it seems a little distant from us and cannot really be palpably touched, but it is clearly there in some sense. We are not the least bit disturbed by the digital cloud. There is nothing dreary or foreboding about it. In fact, for the most part, we do not notice that it is there at all, like real clouds. But by the same token, there is nothing particularly pleasant about it either. Nobody is going to try to paint a picture or write a poem about the Amazon cloud. Nobody comments about how beautiful it is or praises God for creating such a wonderful sight. Perhaps this is the fitting replacement for the glorious clouds of the natural world, a functional, controllable, expandable, and invisible human creation that evokes no emotion but gets the job done. It turns out that cloud is also a fairly common descriptive term in the Bible. There are plenty of times that regular clouds are mentioned, either for their natural beauty or for the sense of fear they may inspire. Clouds are unquestionably the work of God in the Bible, moving around the heavens with divine ease, so close that we sense we are right underneath God's domain, but so distant that the gap is always there for all to see. They brought the rain, so they were essential for life. Without them, all would be desiccated and die. With them, life could go on. But this very common term had another use in the Bible. It was used to describe God's presence in the world. For those who are familiar with the sections describing the journeys of the Israelites in the wilderness and the various experiences they had with God appearing to them in some way, the word cloud is expected and appreciated. It gives an appropriate description of what possibly cannot be described in any other way. It was the pillar of cloud that accompanied the Israelites when they first set out from Egypt. It was there on Mount Sinai, obscuring the view of the peak, but also being the focal point of everyone's attention. Most of all, it was used to provide a picture of how God's presence was sensed around the Mishkan or tabernacle, which is finally completed in this week's Parsha. The Parsha is called Pekudei, which means accounting or inventory or some other very mundane word that doesn't do justice to the Parsha describing the completion of the Mishkan. This Parsha is usually combined with the previous week's Parsha, resulting in a rather long and dry reading consisting of descriptions of the various items that made up the components of the Mishkan. In fact, both of these parshas seem quite repetitious to almost everyone who reads them. They cover almost the same material as was written in the parshas 3 or 4 weeks ago. The only difference is that in those parshas, the individual components were described in design, while in these they are actually constructed and put in place. Pekudei does open with a bit of inventory. It lists the quantities of gold, silver, and copper that were collected to be used in the construction of certain items. Following this, the Parsha then describes the actual making of the various garments that the high priest would wear. These garments, as described 3 weeks ago, were quite complex and involved a great amount of intricate work. Included in them was a good deal of gold and a lot of material made of specifically dyed wool or linen. There were many chains to hold the various pieces together and many precious stones set in specific parts of the garments. Capping it all off was a plate of gold tied to the turban of the high priest, which was inscribed with the words, Kodesh LaShem, holy to Hashem. Following the garments, the actual Mishkan is built. The Mishkan included the main tent, which housed several of the items, including the Ark of the Covenant and a surrounding courtyard. The tent is always referred to as the Ohel Moed, usually translated as tent of meeting. Everything comes together in the final chapter of the book of Exodus. The Torah states that the Mishkan was to be erected on the first day of the first month, which happens to come out in the Hebrew calendar about 3 weeks from now. All of the items were to be placed in their proper location, and then the entire Mishkan and all of its individual components anointed with the oil that would sanctify them. It all took place on the proper day in the second year after the Exodus. The book of Exodus closes with an interesting description of what happened when the Mishkan was finally erected. Quote, "The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of Hashem filled the Mishkan. Moshe was unable to enter into the tent of meeting, for the cloud rested upon it, and the glory of Hashem filled the Mishkan. And when the cloud would lift from upon the Mishkan, the Israelites would travel on all of their journeys. But if the cloud did not rise, they would not travel until the day that it rose. For the cloud of Hashem was upon the Mishkan by day, and a fire would be there at night, visible to the entire house of Israel on all of their journeys." This is a somewhat strange ending to this very long sequence of parshas dealing with the Mishkan. While it is true that it does discuss the Mishkan and the tent of meeting quite a bit, it seems to focus on this other thing, the cloud. This cloud, as mentioned earlier, was very much associated with the journeys of the Israelites following the Exodus. It was there when they crossed the sea and when they received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai. At one point, Moshe entered into it on the peak of Mount Sinai and remained within it for 7 days. But up to this point, there has been no connection between this cloud and the Mishkan. The only suggestion of such a connection appeared a few parshas ago following the events of the golden calf. In a curious series of verses there, which seems to anticipate the verses here at the end of the book of Exodus, the Torah describes how when Moshe would come to the tent, the pillar of cloud was there at the entrance, and it would speak with Moshe. This cloud was visible to everyone, and they recognized its divine nature since they bowed to it. This seems to be what is happening here at the end of our parsha. This is the same cloud that accompanied the Israelites on their journey and was there on Mount Sinai. It would serve as the signal to begin embarking on another journey in the future, or the converse signal to remain where they were. It seemed to be a cloud by day, but perhaps transformed into something like a fire at night, similar to the way it was in the earlier journeys and on Mount Sinai. The Torah describes it as nothing less than the glory of Hashem, which filled the Mishkan. What particularly stands out in this description of the cloud is that verse which states that, quote, "Moshe was unable to come to the tent of meeting, for the cloud was upon it." Wasn't the entire point of the Mishkan and the tent to be a place to commune with God in some way? Why should Moshe, of all people, have been prevented from entering for that very purpose? It seems that he was forced to remain outside while the crucial communing with Hashem was taking place. But this would seem to diminish the experience to some degree and perhaps defeat the whole purpose. Why were all of these items placed in the tent of the Mishkan, clearly to be used at certain times, if Moshe could not enter when he spoke with Hashem? The Torah does not give a clear answer to these questions. They were left for the rabbinic interpretations to answer. This very question was asked about 2,000 years ago, compounded by the fact that other verses state explicitly that Moshe did enter into the tent of meeting. The answer to this apparent contradiction is that there were certain times when Moshe or somebody else could enter the tent, as is clearly indicated by the functions of the items inside it. But there were other times when neither he or anybody else was able to enter. The specific indication that entry was not possible was that, quote, the cloud was upon it. It was this cloud which determined whether one could enter the tent or not. The cloud, as indicated here, was the glory of Hashem which filled the Mishkan. It wasn't an everyday cloud like a layer of fog above the ground. It wasn't even a cloud resembling those in the sky. It was the glory of Hashem. It was only analogous to a normal cloud in the same way that a digital cloud is analogous to a normal cloud. But it differed even from that in that it was visible and not virtual. It was there, filling the space so that nothing else could enter. Perhaps this is the way things have to be when it comes to approaching God. God is right there within arm's reach or eye's reach, so real that we believe we could touch God's presence and certainly detect it. But at the same time, we cannot quite go there. We are prevented from entering because we are not God and have to recognize that as human beings, we are not divine. The divine is right there. It is at the entrance to the tent, and we can interact with it if we have the spiritual strength and are worthy. But with the exception of Moshe when he was on Mount Sinai, there is a barrier that cannot be crossed. The cloud is the glory of Hashem, which retains its glory because we cannot enter within. Shabbat Shalom.